So the example here is what we did at the Will Library, and we used acrylic paint on canvas. So if you want to, do the same thing on acrylic paint on canvas, and if you have the supplies, I'm going to show you how to do something similar on paper. And we're going to use both oil pastels and watercolor, so that if you have watercolor, you can use it, just use watercolor. If you have oil pastel, you could do this just with oil pastel. Because I'm doing this vertically, I'm going to do this mostly in watercolor. And because in the interest of time, it'll be faster to cover a lot more with watercolor. I usually love to use oil pastel for this, but for this instance, because we have blending and we have a lot more coverage, and because we're making our own templates, watercolor will be the predominant material with this. Okay. All right, so I hopefully Z share or Valerie shared the template that I sent, which is for the hot air balloon. I have two sizes. The larger one is what I did on the 11 by 14, which is this one. And then for the demo, and most people have smaller paper. If you have 9 by 12, or if you're doing this on computer paper, that's 8.5 by 11, then there's the smaller hot air balloon. You can also just draw your own hot air balloon. Whatever floats your hot air balloon instead of whatever floats your boat. So if you are able to print it out, you're going to print one out, choose your size, and then cut it out. Okay. And then you're going to put that aside, because believe it or not, the hot air balloon is the last thing that we do. The first thing that we do, and I always tell all my students this, I teach high school at Maria Regina High School from 9th grade to 12th grade, even for little kids, for seniors, it doesn't matter who it is, it's the same process. Whatever is in the background gets painted first, whatever is in the foreground gets painted last. Technically, what's in the foreground here, most of the foreground are the trees, but we're just going to do the hot air balloon at the very end. If you think about it in terms of saving the best for last, whatever, it'll give you time to cut your little template out. So we have, for terms of materials, I mentioned the watercolor, which are here. Mine are very used. And what you need to do whenever you use watercolor is you need to pre-moisten these little watercolor cakes. And you just take, I always use a jar of water. Take your brush and just whatever colors you're going to use. And then in this case, it's a sunset. It's a glorious sunset. Reds, yellows, oranges. I use a little bit of green in my foremost mountainscape here. Whatever colors you want to use. If you want to make this a blue sky, you can make this a blue sky and start with maybe a light blue, move up to purple, whatever you would like to do. The purposes of this demo, we're going to stick with my example. Okay, so I pre-moisten my colors so that they'll be ready to be picked up and used on my paper. Okay, and here's a couple of different, if you have this option, that's fine. My yellow is low on this one, so I'm using this one for my yellow. And then I will use, like I mentioned, mostly watercolors, but if you want to use oil pastel, I've got oil pastels here. I'll show you how to do trees with both oil pastel and watercolor. We did in the Will Library, we did the trees using cardboard. This is just corrugated cardboard. This is called chipboard pieces, which is if you get like the back of a drawing pad, this is often on there. I always save the last, here, I'll show you what I mean. So here's a watercolor pad. Okay, on the very back of it, this is chipboard. And this is, I love this stuff. You can paint on it. You can prime it first and then paint. Treat it as if it's like canvas and paint on it. It's nice and thick and solid. Lots of uses for chipboard, and even the tiniest pieces. Believe it or not, I made these trees using these little chipboard pieces. You don't have to use them, but it's quick and easy, and it's fast. Okay, the other thing that I use material-wise, if you don't have construction paper, this is just old construction paper. You can see it's kind of creased, it's faded. This is how I made my mountains. And you can do this with oil pastel. I'm going to use watercolor. just because it's vertical, it'll be faster. I can show you a little, maybe the foreground one with oil pastel. Water and oil don't mix. I can use oil pastel on top of water, but I'd have to wait for the watercolor to dry. So that's because we have an hour, we're gonna use mostly watercolor just to keep it consistent. Okay, so let's start with, as I mentioned, whatever is in the back first, which in this case is the sky. And a norm, I don't know what it isn't the sky when we're doing landscape. It's the sky, so we're gonna start with that. And then here's my paper, and I'm gonna now change this so instead of looking at me, you can see the paper, okay? And this light is pretty good for that. If anybody has any questions or can't see, or just put it in chat, and hopefully Z, or you can just, my preference is always just, just talk, let's just communicate, talk to me. I'm listening, even though I'm working, I can hear you. And just, ask me a question. You never know if somebody else might have the same question. So there's no questions that are not good to ask. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-moisten my paper. This makes the paper more, it makes it a better receptacle for the watercolor paint. So it's kind of like primer, it's priming it, it's getting it ready. And you don't have to be exact, but if you're putting, this is called a wet on wet technique, and watercolor likes wet on wet. It's getting, telling the paper, get ready, you're going to get some color soon. Okay. If you have a bigger brush, go ahead and use a bigger brush. I'm just getting the surface moist. You don't have to go all the way down because mountains are going to go down there. This is for the sky. Okay. All right, so it's pretty moistened. Now I started with a red, and I'm gonna work my way down to a lighter color, to yellow, because it's a sunset. The brightest color is normally at the bottom where the sun rays are. So I'm loading up this brush with red paint, and I'm gonna go across this top. And because it's pre-moistened, it's accepting it a lot more easily. And I'm doing mostly a horizontal stroke because think about horizon, think about land. It is a horizontal kind of format. Okay, and then as I get to where my next color is, I want to put a little bit of water there to start blending it, because you don't want stripes. The sky's not made up of stripes. Sometimes you see clouds there and they add shapes, but it's not stripes. Then I'm moving to orange, and I'm laying orange on top of that and blending it down. And as my brush runs dry, go back and get water. And also blended it back up to the top. It's all about blending. And then I'm gonna start putting yellow soon, so I'm blending this down, thinning it out a little bit. And then I'm gonna go back and get yellow. Really load up your brush with yellow. It's the lightest color. So you really want to load up that brush with yellow. Go. And then take the yellow all the way down, take it home to the bottom. You don't have to go all the way to the bottom, but it just prevents that line when you add your mountains. And go back over the top here to blend it. You notice I'm going up and down. The paper is still kind of moist, so it's blending much more easily. So water, paint, paper, water, paint, paper. Now I want to get the top a little bit deeper. Second coat, all the second coat. A little bit more delicately, you can deepen that color at the top. We used big, what are called chip brushes. chip brushes. It's funny, they should be called cheap brushes because they literally are very inexpensive and they're kind of wide. You can get them in different sizes, and we use them to do this process on the canvas board. So we made it very fast and much more, easy to blend. Also, canvas board does not wrinkle. Canvas board is solid, and it has like this kind of almost, it's not a waterproof surface, but it has a surface that prevents it from curling. Paper does not have it, and this is not watercolor paper. This is just regular drawing paper. Watercolor paper, it's a little bit stockier, has a texture, and I would use that for this, except that I'm doing some oil pastel, and I do not like using oil pastel on watercolor paper. The texture that watercolor paint loves, oil pastel does not love, so that's why I don't use it for watercolor paper. Use the paper that was created for the material, the medium that it was created for. Okay. All right, so that's, I like that sky. It looks whiter on screen than it is here. I'm actually going to deepen my yellow a little bit. Get like an orangey yellow. And then we're going to move on to our mountains while that dries a little bit. That's a little bit better. I want to see it because it looks white on the screen and it's not white. Okay, so don't wet your paper too much because you need to add your mountains on top. I have a ceiling fan going, which will help dry that. Ideally, you want it bone dry before you do the next level, the next layer. Mine's going to be slightly moistened or damp. Okay, so there's no drawing at all for the mountains. Let me I'll move this closer so you can see. Everybody's mountains will be unique because you're doing your mountains, making your own stencils with torn paper. Okay, see the mountains? And it looks realistic. It looks like the real way that craggy peaks, when you look at mountains in the distance, the rock formations. And that's because we're tearing. Okay, I have 3 layers of mountains. You can do 4, 5, 2, 1, whichever you like. I like to do things in 3s and 5. That's kind of a quirk of mine. So all I'm doing here is I'm tearing my mountain. You don't want it to be even. You want it to be arbitrary, as mountains are. Like arbitrary meaning sometimes peaks are higher, sometimes the valleys are wide. Now I feel like this is too even. I don't know how that happened. I'm going to go ahead and make it less even, more realistic, like a mountain. This looks like a volcano to me. I'm going to tear that. All I'm doing is, I guess if you think about it, I'm drawing by tearing paper. Oh, I'm kind of liking that. It's a mountain range. Okay, so that's 1 layer of mountains. And again, you can do this with any scrap. If you have newspaper is great for this. You have those ShopRite circulars or Stop and Shop circulars, whatever you have in your recycling. I happen to like construction paper because I get a nice rough edge and it's easy to tear. And it's a little bit thicker, but any kind of paper works fine for this. Now I'm going to do, because I have 3 layers of mountains, I need to have another. You can use the same one. I like to have it more random, as is in nature. Okay, so just from tearing this now, I have 3 mountain range shapes to choose from. This one was actually going to be this. So if you see what I'm talking about, if I put this over there, that's the shape of the mountain range. And then I can use this one. That's totally different. That's going to go below it. I don't like this little triangle peak. It's too looks like a pyramid. So I'm going to adjust that. And a lot of times you get happy accidents, as Bob Ross, the painter, used to say, I like that better. See that? You can see, you can put it up against to check to see what I mean. Okay, and then I have this other piece that I tore. So let's see what I get from that. And I can always adjust as I go. Wait, this was the first one. That's going to be my first mountain range. Then this is, oh, I have 2 here. Yeah. Give me the second. And as I do this, you'll see what I'm talking about, because I know this can be a little confusing. All right, I like all three of these. If you don't, get more paper and tear more. Maybe you like, let's do another one real fast. Maybe you'll like another one that you did better after you do your painting. This looks like a camel hump to me. I'm not sure I like that. If you get something like that and you like it, you can use it, but I'm not jazzed about that. I like the other two that I did, the other two pieces with my three peaks. Okay, so this is about dry enough. You can touch it. I need to stretch out my paper because it curled a little from the watercolor. All right, so I used like a deep brownish orange for my first layer. So I think I want to stick with that. Okay, so this is my first layer. And when you do this at home, you'll be doing this, lying it flat. So this will be easier for you. You can hold it down just in place with one finger. Here, I have to make sure I hold it across so that it doesn't fall down, because gravity is not my friend when something is vertical. I'm just adjusting this. I'm not crazy about this little peak. Okay, I like that better. You see, it's just that easy to just make your adjustments. All right, so my first, I about mid-range, that's where I'm starting. So that's where my first mountain range is going to be. So I can show you how you can do this with oil pastel. I'm going to save the oil pastel for the very bottom range, because you can't put oil on top of water. If you've done lessons with me before and I've done the resist, then oil pastel, if you put that on first, the watercolor will not go over it. It's like wax, it resists it. So I could put oil pastel here. And I'm sorry, I don't, if I turn that off. And then I don't have to worry about painting watercolor on top of there. If you just have all watercolor, don't worry about it. You don't have to do any oil pastel, but I'll show you that you can do with both. So I like that positioning for my mountains. And I'm gonna go and grab a nice kind of deep brown. Maybe I'll mix a little orange on top. I don't know, it's all kind of see what you put down and see what you get. So I loaded my brush with watercolor. And now this is my stencil. Start from the top and then move your color down. And the same way that you did with your, so I'm going vertical strokes, but the same way here, you're going to try to blend down because you want the next layer to cover it. So you don't want hard edges, you want soft feathery edges. But my first task is to first get the shape of the mountains that I so nicely tore, or was so much, it was so fun to tear them, and go all the way across quickly. This is where you have to work quickly, because if it dries, it's harder to blend. Because I want like a deeper, like a reddish color for my next layer. Okay, and it was that fast. And then this is the reveal. Ta-da! There's the mountain range, the first layer. Now I want to work quickly here because I want to blend out this a little bit so that my next level has a little bit of a lighter, background so I can cover it. And I'm blending this. I actually like the vertical lines here with the watercolor, which we didn't get there. Well, we used chip brushes to do that as well. These vertical lines look like, I don't know if the Palisades. So I thought of when I saw this, we could have our own type of Palisades here. All right, so now I'm going to start with my next level. So this is the first one. And then I think I liked, what did I like? Oh, this one has this peak again that I'm not crazy about. Again, if you like it and you get those peaks. Yeah, okay. So that's going to go right on top. You can see which way works better. Okay, I like this. And then it's the same process. Okay. I'm just gonna with my fingers, and again, you don't have to do this. I'm doing this because of interest of time. I'm blending it out. You stay up there. I want it to dry. All right, now I'm gonna get like a reddish, darker reddish color and put that right on top. Almost like a maroon. Same process. And now I have the benefit of that brown underneath, so it'll be even a richer color. But I'm not going up. My strokes are all going down from, doesn't matter how messy you are on your paper. The strokes go down from the top of the paper. I just mixed a little bit of a really dark red there. It's really fun to pick up the stencil and see what your mountains look like. And on the edges and stuff, you're gonna put trees there, don't forget, so. Okay. There's my second layer of mountains. Blending the bottom a little bit. Now I'm gonna use oil pastel here. I think I'm just gonna do the middle part with oil pastel, and then I'm gonna do the edges with watercolor. Okay, and then my last layer of mountains. And then the same thing with the trees. I'm gonna do the middle part of it with oil pastel so that you can see both. And then here's my last layer. See that? So that's gonna go right here. And I want to choose a color that really will pop. So, because if you think of it, if you see the Palisades, we could think trees, right? So like a greenish olive color, that's why I chose that. Just trying to help the drying here by spreading this out. Okay. So you can play around with colors with this and do a couple of versions. It's not a lengthy process as you see. Okay. So I'm gonna choose like a green. My colors on this are a little bit darker than I used in my example. I do want to make sure you see it. Oh, wait, I was going to do oil pastel. Let's do 1/2 watercolor, 1/2 oil pastel. All right, so it's a little bit wet, but so if you wanted to use oil pastel, it's a little more time consuming, but you can still, it's the same process. You're going to go from the top and pull it down. And I want to blend out with a little bit of yellow. You can do a combination of oil pastel and watercolor too. You're only limited by your imagination. All right, and there's the last layer of the trees. It's different. The texture is a little bit different, but you get the same. They look like trees, but you get the same effect that they're mountains. Because again, I like things consistent. I'm gonna make this blended. This here. Okay. So that's stage one. This is basically the three layers of mountain. And I want to make this first color I like, the second color needs to be deeper. Go back over here, just match it up. And actually, because we're doing this as multimedia, do two mediums, we're using watercolor and oil pastel. I'm gonna use my oil pastel to deepen this. I like consistency, so that's my preference. And I like everything to look consistent, even though I used different media. I feel like it's more, it's more in tune with nature. And I like the lines over there, so I want to add that over here. And also like the effect of the palisade look. Palisades, the mountain, the way the rocks are across the river. Ah, yeah, see, that's a lot better. Makes it pop more. Okay. All right. Now at this point, let me check the time. I'm pretty good on time. Um, with any kind of painting process, it's about layering. So we have some time and we want to use our time. The trees again don't take that long. It looks like it takes a long time. My yellow, I'm going to go back and deepen my yellow a little bit. And at the same time, it makes that mountain crisp up in the back. So this is using the negative space. The negative space is the sky behind the mountains. And I'm just deepening that. And enriching, I'm saturating the color. Because now my mountains are there and this really helps me see where I want, in this case, where I want my yellow to be really bright yellow. So this is quick. This is just like kind of like the cleanup process. Refine your shapes more to bring saturate your colors. I want my sunset to be really vivid. Because when you're up in the sky, it's an adventure, right? So nothing soft about this. It's going to be bright and adventurous. Deepen up the that gold. Really make it dramatic. That's what I'm really looking for here. We want a really dramatic sky. And the other thing here is that the paint has had a chance to dry and I can see where my streaks are, and this gives you an opportunity to blend everything out as well as saturate. Saturation is like a sponge, how much water it soaks up. This is seeing how much color we can get this paper to soak up. Saturation. The more it soaks, the more saturated it is, the color. So that's what I call dramatic. Same with my mountain range. Because we're not using acrylic, we use watercolor. I can saturate the mountain range a little bit. All I'm doing is going over my lines, and this is fun. This is like coloring. And you're defining your shapes more. We've got the Palisades in 3 levels here. With the, I don't know if I've seen our Palisades are very, I've never seen anything quite like our Palisades, the way those rocks are formed. Go back and grab red. Now, a lot of the mountain is going to be covered, are going to be covered by trees. So you don't have to go too crazy with this, but you know, wherever they do appear, you want them to look dramatic. And there's that name, that word again. Back and grab template here. I love that. I really like that cragginess. And just on the top. And I always talk about color theory a little bit in each class. Another reason why I chose that green in the foreground. Usually red likes to be in the foreground, but I put this greenish red, I'm sorry, this red next to this green because they're complementary colors and they cause a nice contrast. All right. Now the trees. So if you happen to have like either tubes of acrylic paint, this is acrylic paint, or you know those little craft containers of acrylic paint that you get from Michael's. They're like little bottles, like 79 cents. Well, maybe when they're on sale. You can use that. For these here, I used a combination of brown, purple. There's no black here. It looks like they're black. Which you can do, or just get, I use a combination of those colors for this as well, because the black is a little bit too striking, too dramatic. And we do, that's fine too. And for the purposes of this demo, we will do that because it'll be easier. We will use black. So this is a little bit of black. And I've showed you my little pieces of cardboard. And this is such a cute little nifty way to do trees, or, you know, I've only really done pine trees with them, but you could do bushes if you wanted. You can probably do water with them. It's just a good way to cover surface using you know, pieces of this cardboard. So I'm just going to use my tray. If you have a paper plate, use a paper plate. If you have a plastic lid from one of those Tupperware containers that you don't, you know, the takeout containers, use that. And then grab your paint. Squeeze a little out on it. Yeah, that. And I'm going to wet it. It's too pasty as it is, so I have to, this is the word I love to use a lot, you're thinning out the viscosity of this. You're making it a little bit more spreadable and not as pasty, because what we're going to do is dip the, let's see, I'm thinning it out. And you're also kind of extending the coverage. You're getting, using a toothpaste amount of paint, but you're increasing the volume of it, if you want to say, think about it that way, so that you get more coverage with less paint. So I'm thinning it out, making, maybe if it was toothpaste consistency, now I'm making it like a pancake batter consistency for anybody who likes to cook or bake. All right. So I like that consistency. And well, let's take a little one now. Well, let's take a bigger one. We'll start at the bottom. And you dip it in your paint that you've mixed. And then the pine trees, you can have them go down. You're going to start with making the trunks of the pine trees, okay? Or the center of them. And all I'm doing is tapping it onto the surface of the paper. It starts with a tip. And again, we're not making a pattern. Sometimes pine trees grow close together in nature. Sometimes one stands on its own. So you start dipping and spread it out. Start at the top and push down. Okay. If you like to hike, Look how the pine trees are, how they grow in nature. Some of them are close together. So that's how they're growing. Now I'm going to add the pine needles, if you want to think of it that way. And it's the same process, work up to down. And you just think like a pine tree. How are the needles? They're all kind of random. You can change to a smaller one to do the smaller, this is a little piece of a smaller one. And this is a good thing to practice on a piece of scrap paper before you do it here. Leave some emptiness because, you know, if you notice, that's what it's like in nature. Sometimes the branches fall off, or some branches give more pine needles than other ones. So don't do a full cover. Leave a little bit of air in some areas so you can see the mountains in the background. I'm gonna leave this area because we're gonna do oil pastel on this side, and then in the middle we'll do some of the combination. So if I'm gonna put the paint, I'm gonna wait until I see where the oil pastel the trees end. And you want to have some that are sort of angled outwards more. Shorter ones, taller ones, fatter ones, thinner ones. The bottom always has the most growth, growth up to the top and thin out. So that's what we're doing with our little piece of cardboard. You hear my tapping, I'm just tapping that board onto a little piece of chipboard onto my palette. And here in the bottom, this is where you want to fill it in because that's where there's much more growth. It's like a cone, like a, yeah, cone shape. Cones are thicker in the bottom, and then they get to a point at the top. And that's what we're doing with these, but there's a lot of overlap. But I think you get the idea. If you wanted to, again, not again, because I didn't talk about this, the reason why the pine trees are dark, and why I'm doing them black for the demo here is because it's backlit. They're backlit. The sun is behind, the mountains are darker, the pine trees are dark is because it's backlit. If this were daylight and it wasn't sunset, then you could use green because, you know, you can, if you have, you can take your green from your palette here and put it on the side. You can't dip your cardboard in there, but you can add, some people like to do that. They like, but pine trees are green. Then you can do that if you're doing it sunset. I'm just showing you how here. I'm grabbing my color and I'm making a little pool of green. And you can mix it on top of the black and do the same thing. You can do this with watercolor too if you don't have acrylic paint. It just doesn't cover as thickly as the, so I'll show you. I'm doing the same thing. If you were doing with watercolor, it's a more opaque. No, I'm sorry, it's less opaque. It's more translucent and it's a little bit runnier, but you can do green as well. Maybe in the middle, there's more light. I don't know. Just, you know, you can mix green in here with here, which I like too. You do a combination of black and green, but you don't get the sharper, crisper, you know, points when you're using watercolor because it's thinner. But you can still get pine trees. You get the same effect. You might like this one better. I don't know. If you prefer doing this with watercolor and you like it better, go for it. You like the combination? Then do the combination. more colorful when you do a combination in nature. So now I'm gonna add black again because I like consistency. That's just my style. Because I don't like that green one on its own, but you can do it just to show you that you can do it. Now, if you just have oil pastels, we have done pine trees in these classes that I've done here with oil pastel. So here's black oil pastel. I don't use black a lot, which is why, well, this is a new set, but you don't even have to break it if it's new, but you do want to get a kind of an edge. So if you have one that is kind of soft on the edge, you're going to break it so that you get sharper edges. That's what gives you crisper points. And the same way that I did the trees there, start off with where do you want your trees to grow? Some are close, some are far away, some are short, some are tall. But don't spread them equally. It's just because of nature they don't grow that way. And then the same thing, you're gonna be your tree. It might be it's a little easier because everything's coming, going back and getting it. But think of it like an umbrella that's open the wrong way. It's the same idea. Upwards, because the pine tree, the needles grow upwards. For the most part, these pine trees do. And then leave a little tip because the needles stop growing over there. Christmas trees have a little tip for the star or the angel or whatever you put on top. So same thing here. And we're making our lines jagged. That's how you can see the motion here. It's the more nervous you are doing this, by the way, the better. And so you get even more realistic trees. So you could see the difference with how the watercolor or the acrylic ones look to the oil pastel ones, but they both look, I think, pretty cool. You're getting the idea of the pine tree across. A little unusual next to each other like that. Ideally, I would like to mix it, but again, this is for the purposes of showing how you can do this with both oil pastel and watercolor, or oil pastel or watercolor. And always try to get think of it as when you're taking a photograph, trees wouldn't run to the middle to make sure everybody's in the middle. They are where they are. So you're gonna have some trees go off at the edge of the paper, and that's how it should look. It's cropped out, so the trees should go off the edge of the paper. You can hear the sound of the oil pastel. It's kind of jaggedy, and that's because the tree shapes are jaggedy. Right, so again, it's the same thing. You have to have some areas that are darker because there's more needles there, more pine branches, especially at the bottom. And then as you get to the top, there's more air and you see the mountains in the background. I'm gonna do some overlap. I'm probably gonna put some more acrylic ones there too. And the same thing here that we did with this tree in particular. You can go back and get a darker, another color so that you get, a multi-level, multi-layered, multi-dimensional, everything multi effect. It's not as flat. I have this dark green. I'm just reinforcing some of the shapes with that. You might prefer the oil pastel ones. Maybe you like the watercolor ones. Either way, they're both fun to do. So the reason why I'm able to cover this with oil pastel is because it's acrylic paint and it's harder and more opaque. And with watercolor too, you can do the same, but it's harder to cover. And I mean, with acrylic paint, we can cover that to some extent. With watercolor, would be much harder. But let's show you. So I want to grab some acrylic and try to get some of that in there so that it's consistent. So I'm just going right back over it because it's acrylic paint. It's kind of more, thicker, groupier paint. It'll cover to some extent the oil pastel. You normally don't like to, you should not go oil on top of water. No, reverse that. You should not go water on top of oil. Like salad dressing, the oil goes to the top. And after it settles, same kind of thing with this, but acrylic paint will kind of cover the oil pastel to some extent. All right, well, there are my trees. So we're just about ready for the hot air balloon. And, you can do more than one. I'm just doing one. And we have about 10 minutes, which is enough time to do that. Okay, so the same way that I did the mountains with oil pastel, you can use your template. Let me find my template that I cut out so nicely. Here it is. Okay. And then position it about where you want it to be. I want it about right there. Don't go too close to the top. All right. Grab paint. We'll do half a part. I just want to do, make sure you see both. Oh, I forgot to mention too that I save my old towels, cut them to pieces, and I use them as rags. When you want a dry brush, you need something to dry your brush with. Paper towels. So I like to use rags just because here you want to have a dry brush. Whenever you stencil, you've got to have a dry brush. In this case, we had a jaggedy edge and it was okay for blood a little bit. Here we want our edge to be really crisp. So you've got to have a really dry brush for that. Okay, so I'm getting my paint. You don't want to wet your brush when you get your paint too. You want to get a nice dry brush. The drier the brush, the better. And it's the same process. You're going to go out to in. Start on the paper. And you can see if it's dry, it's actually better. And you can go always, we're going to go back over this and clean it up with the brush or with oil pastel. I'm going out to in. And it's okay to have that raggedy, not raggedy on the outside, it's raggedy on the inside because that means it's dry and you're not going to get bleeding. And if you're using oil pastel, there's no need to worry about anything drying, but you're going to go out to in. You kind of go along the edge here if you want this because it's not going to bleed. That's the one benefit of doing this with oil pastel. It won't bleed underneath. There's no moisture that's going to make it bleed. It takes a little bit longer than using watercolor. But this is just to get the shape in there really fast. You can draw this by hand if you want to. And I'm putting this acrylic on top of the oil because it's acrylic. Use watercolor as well. All right. And there's my hot air balloon. Now I mentioned that there's always the cleanup. So you can get a smaller brush or use the same brush. And then I also want to draw I drew people in mine, but the lines too, because the rope, right? The rope that attaches. Where's the cleanup? Here's the basket. Attached to the if you have a permanent marker or a black colored pencil, you can do this with that. Tend to be 4 row pieces or whatever you want to call them because it's the 4 corners of the basket. So I just draw 4 and then I'm going to clean this up. Top. I'm making like the balloon edges that are kind of like they're rounded because the balloons are made of big strips of fabric that are sewn together. And that's what gives them that bulb. It's kind of like a garlic cube. I mean, a fist of garlic. Has that look. I'm using my finger to steady my painting hand because if it's floating on the top, it's not going to be as steady. And, that's it. If you wanted to, add some birds, which I didn't do on there, but I'm feeling like they're needed here. Don't know why. Maybe one more here. And then whenever I'm finished painting something, in this case I used white. I do have white watercolor paint, which I very, very rarely, if ever, use, but this is a good opportunity to use it. Sign your work and always date it. And I'm just going to put my first name. And 7/24. All right, and then I'll get a close up here. Okay. So we have the acrylic on canvas at the top. And at the bottom, we have watercolor and oil pastel on paper. And that was our hot air balloon adventure today.